Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. One of the big issues that the Ford government has really used as, I think, a wedge issue between the Liberals and the Conservatives is Highway 413 and something called the Bradford bypass. And I didn't know much about the Bradford bypass. And so I wanted to reach out to two people that are in that area that I really respect. One is a new member of parliament, Leah Tayor, who I had the privilege of interviewing during the election campaign. One of the most impressive ladies that I've had the privilege of interviewing. She's got a Harvard Kennedy School of Government background. She worked for, 20 years for McKinsey, one of the major consulting firms, did some work with the World Bank, with the United Nations, has got some environmental creds, et cetera. A very impressive person. But this Bradford bypass is going to be a local issue. And so therefore, someone that's got all these big international experiences, let's see what she's got to say about the local issue that's some import to people in this North Toronto area of her riding. And Darryl Wolk, who is one of my long-term conservative friends. He's been a long-term conservative. He ran municipally in Newmarket. He's currently working with a local Ontario municipal organization, primarily on social services. Very knowledgeable about what's going on, not only across Ontario, but for sure in Newmarket and Bradford. So, maybe Darryl, I could start with you. Tell us a little bit about the history of the Bradford bypass, if you could, and why you think it's something that we should be supporting.
Yeah, no, I think York Region and Northern York Region have seen a lot of good projects and promises. We just had the announcement about the Vaughan, Caledon, Bolton GO train. Ultimately, the Bradford bypass is a highway that's meant to connect Highway 404 that's recently been extended out to Georgina, and it'll connect to Highway 400 along the Raven Shoe Highway 89 area. Ultimately, planning for this started in 1978, which is longer than I've been alive. I know in 2014, there was a lot of excitement when the 404 was extended, and this is a high priority of the municipalities in the area, particularly Bradford, East Gwillimbury, and Georgina, where there's going to be a lot of growth, and also Newmarket, where a lot of our traffic gridlock will be impacted by that future growth, particularly on Green Lane. Doug Ford recently announced that he wants to move forward with the planning. At this point, there's still some issues around what the cost will be and how the funding will be allocated. But it is a project that's vital to Northern York Region's economic development. It's part of the York Region official plan. It's been endorsed by the Holland Marsh Growers Association and all the municipalities in York Region. And there are some environmental issues and assessments still outstanding. But it is a project that the region's been calling for close to 40 years now.
And you support it?
I definitely support it. I don't know if, because of Lake Simcoe, if you were theoretically trying to go up to Cottage Country and you came down the 400, you'd have to go through Green Lane, you'd have to go through Holland Road, which is in Bradford. It would take probably about 45 minutes to get from Highway 404 to 400. Ultimately, there's a lot of economic development that could potentially go along this highway. Certainly, Georgina, East Gwillimbury are growing at a rapid pace. Just to give you some numbers, East Gwillimbury currently has a population of 36,500. By 2030, they're supposed to go to 59,300. Georgina is at 49,000 now. They're going to go over 57,000 by the time 2030 comes along. And Newmarket and Aurora, where Lee and myself are from, we're in communities that are basically getting close to out of land. So we're going to start to see a lot of the development move north. And that also encompasses Barrie, which would be on the other side of the Lake Simcoe, about 20-minute drive from where the bypass would be.
So let's turn to Leah Tayor. You're a brand new member of parliament. I know this is more a municipal or provincial issue, but the provincial Liberals have come out strongly against both Highway 413 as well as the Bradford bypass. And undoubtedly, people in your local community are going to be asking your point of view. What's your position on the Bradford bypass?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that, Darryl, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. There is a lot of growth in our area. I think that we are going to be in need of new transit for certain. And I think like many, including a lot of the municipalities now and the provincial Liberals, in fact, we're not saying no highway, no remedy to this congestion that they have in the West and East Gwillimbury and Georgina area due to that development. But simply that, as you mentioned, this is a project that was first proposed 40 years ago. And the last full environmental assessment that was done was in 1997. Now, last year, there's a number of organizations and people who are also opposed to the bypass, as you know, and a number of those groups brought a petition and brought a appeal to the Impact Assessment Agency, asking for a full environmental review. The then Minister of the Environment, Jonathan Wilkinson, said, no, it's not necessary because there are significant environmental reviews and assessments being done by the province. Since that time, in fact, on October 7th of last year, our Premier in Ontario, Doug Ford, exempted this road from the environmental assessment procedure. Now, my position and the position of many people in my constituency and people who have spoken to me is that this requires a full environmental assessment. And the fact that the province has now said they're not going to do it, and in fact, are proceeding to build part of it, as Doug Ford would very much like to have this as part of his election platform, showing there is progress being made, before any reviews are being done that were requested, is in my mind, just goes against everything we're saying right now about the necessity of evaluating the environment and the economy jointly. So it's really not that I'm saying there's nothing needed, Darryl, and it's neither what people are saying to me. However, what is proposed right now is both from an environmental and an economic perspective, really not the best alternative. And I'm not an engineer. I'm not someone who could say this is the best alternative, but I know there are several other alternatives that have been proposed. And I think that we owe it to our future, to the future of our children and grandchildren, and to all those constituents who are objecting, to look at what those alternatives are from an economic and an environmental perspective and say, is this really the best way to solve this problem?
We're chatting tonight with Darryl Wolk and Leah Tayor. Darryl is a long-term conservative, works right now for a Ontario municipal social services organization. Leah Tayor is the new member of parliament for, what's the riding, Aurora, Newmarket?
Aurora, Oak Ridges, and Richmond Hill.
Aurora, Oak Ridges, and Richmond Hill.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think she's a rising star within the Liberal Party. There's no question about it. And I think Darryl Wolk is one of those rising stars long-term within the Conservative Party, if not municipally. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Darryl and Leah in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got two incredibly experienced, knowledgeable politicos and nice people as my guest today. Leah Tayor is the new member of parliament for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, which is north of Toronto. And Darryl Wolk is someone who would like to be an MPP or an MP or a mayor or a councillor in that area, has run previously. Leah, Liberal, Darryl, a Conservative. And we're talking about the Bradford bypass. We might also touch on Highway 413 and some of the issues, but primarily the Bradford bypass. Leah, I wonder if you could just sort of, maybe take a step back and give us a little overview of what this highway is meant to do and where is it go?
Mm-hmm. Well, this highway has been proposed as a solution to the traffic congestion that has been building up, quite frankly, between in the whole area of Bradford, East Gwillimbury, Georgina, and coming down into Newmarket, because there is no direct and good route between Highway 400 and Highway 404, east to west, that will bring the traffic from one to the other. So there has been concern about this traffic and the need for, with future development, the need for better routes. So I think, and it's called the Bradford bypass. Originally, they tried to call it the Highway 400, 404 connector. It didn't stick, so it's called the Bradford bypass. But in fact, it doesn't really bypass. And one of the things when you look at the map is you can see where it goes through wetlands in the Holland Marsh. And as many people who are listening may know, the Holland Marsh is some of the best and richest farmland we have in Ontario. It is not only from environmental or a sustainability perspective, it's also very important, these wetlands, in terms of ongoing flood mitigation and adaptation. So putting a 4-lane paved highway through here to solve this problem really creates a lot of other problems and costs for the community. So it does, as I say, provide what they propose provides a relief for traffic, a direct route for cars to get from Highway 400 to Highway 404. But the other thing I'd add for a lot of people who may be listening to this, the north-south drive on Highway 404 right now into Toronto is pretty busy most of the time. Now, perhaps not during COVID as much, but it gets very congested. And this is going to bring additional traffic onto Highway 404 going south. It will, even though we may say it's just providing an alternate route, eventually, as we all know, when a 4-lane highway gets built, development is built all around it. And this is going to increase the congestion on that highway going south from where this connector or Bradford bypass will intersect with Highway 404. And I don't think we need more traffic on 404 in the DVP.
So one of the things that I've heard is that the farmers in the Holland Marsh don't have easy access to market sometimes because of congestion on Highway 400. And they've been asking for this alternate route to get over the 404. But I was a little bit surprised by that because, they could go down to the 407, they could go down to the 401. So how important is this? Is this just to make it more convenient for cottagers to get back to downtown Toronto when they're coming down the Highway 11 and the 400 from their beautiful cottages on Lake Rosso and Muskoka? What's the intention of this bypass, Darryl?
Yeah, no, in full disclosure, back in 2010, I did government relations with the Holland Marsh Growers Association, and I think it is Canada's salad bowl, ultimately some of the most important soil in the province, some of the most fertile soil. It's all heavily protected. There's been a lot of investments to protect Lake Simcoe and the farmland. It's all vegetables that are grown, no animals to further protect the soil. In terms of crossing the Holland Marsh, then I think the first thing we have to point out is that Highway 400 itself splits the Holland Marsh. And ultimately, this would cross 0.35% of the Holland Marsh on the north end. And I think what's happening is right now, most of the produce that's produced by the Holland Marsh Growers Association ends up going up to 3,000 kilometers away, a lot of it into U.S. markets. There's a major issue around a lack of food processing and packaging facilities. And I think as part of Bradford's economic development, they'd like to sort of become an agriculture hub and package and produce a lot of that locally. There's no question with some of the supply chain issues and food security issues we're seeing that we have to be more serious about looking after our agriculture needs. 407, of course, is a tolled highway, which adds to the cost. And I do agree with Lee. There's heavy traffic congestion on both the 400 and the 404, and certainly when people are going up to their cottages. But I think the idea would be you would have economic development along the highway. It's possible you'd have to add additional lanes to the 400. And I know we're going to talk about the 413 in a little bit, but in a perfect world for me, we would actually extend the 427 north and then connect the 427, 404, and 400, providing better access to the airport and access to all three north-south highways and having a northern east-west connection. That's not a toll road like the 407.
So Darryl, let me ask you, why doesn't the 413 and the Bradford bypass line up? Like I could, obviously there's going to be a lot of questions about the 413 and we can talk about that as well, but at minimum, why don't they line up?
Because on the west side of Highway 400 is the Holland Marsh area. So the 413 is south of that. So my assumption on why they're going in that direction is to avoid some of the environmentally sensitive lands in the northern part. And Newmarket Aurora is also surrounded by some sensitive lands, not just the Holland Marsh, but also the Greenbelt and the Oak Ridges Marine.
But the intention of the 413, I understand, is that eventually it'll go all the way to the east of Toronto. So it'll be another ring road, just like the 401 or the 407.
Yeah, I mean, the 413 is a project that is fairly newer. Certainly the Bradford bypass, the community's been calling for a long time. This one kind of came more out of the blue, to be honest with you. There's some similar routes, the 409, for example, that goes to the airport. The 407 cuts through and basically spits out at the 401 around the same area. And there's also some greenbelt areas around there. I think the big difference between the two highways is the 413 is not supported by the surrounding communities of Orangeville, Caledon, Peel Region, Halton. And I believe the City of Toronto also passed a resolution opposing it, whereas the Bradford bypass has been called for a long time. And as I said, there is some movement as well to extend the 427 north, and also I know Caledon in the past has called for the 410 to be extended northbound as well. So 413 I think is a bit more dicey, but the Bradford bypass I think has more broad support.
Leah?
Yeah, if I could just weigh in on that. I've heard the argument about the 400 before, Darryl, but I just want to point out, this is one of my issues, is that highway was built quite a while ago, before we really had, the knowledge we have now about what's happening with our environment. And I'm not sure how that would have been built or where it would have been built had we known what we know now about the, deleterious effects of climate change. So just because we've made a mistake in the past, I just don't think justifies making another one. And we have an opportunity here to say, we all talk about climate change. We all talk about the impacts and how important it is, not just for our community, but worldwide. And really, I'm not only talking about, the environmentalists who are trying to save some of the migratory birds that are in this area. I'm also talking about the economic benefits of this. Just to go back a little bit, Brian, I meant to say, I grew up going to school in the Holland Marsh. My family on my mother's side is Dutch. We have a lot of farmers. In fact, my uncle had a very large farm in the Holland Marsh in Cooks Bay, and he's opposed to this project. He's a conservative, by the way. You should talk to him. But there are a lot of conservatives. There are a lot of farmers who are also opposed to this project. And since the provincial government exempted this from the environmental review, many municipalities have changed their position on this. So I think it's worth really looking more recently on what's going on and giving 413 still in play. There is going to be development, but there are many options to help farmers get to markets more quickly. And as you say, many of them are driving 3,000 kilometers right now. The extra 15, 20, let's even give it a half an hour that they're going to save here is not going to make a significant difference. But the loss of these wetlands, the loss of this area in the Greenbelt, and the impact this is going to have on Lake Simcoe, where we have First Nations who are objecting to this project. They see what's happened even with the 404 extension, which was more recent, to the water quality in Lake Simcoe. And they're very concerned, as are many environmentalists. And where this road is proposed right now, it crosses the Holland River twice, the East and West Holland River. These are very expensive bridges to build. This project is probably going to come in at over $1 billion. And do we really think we need to spend this much money to address this problem? And I think part of the issue here is political. A 400 series highway is paid for by the provincial government. Regional road solutions, of which there are many, fall to the region and municipality. I would argue it's part of the reason why this project is getting support. And of course, politically again, Doug Ford wants to have shovels in the ground. There are jobs being created. It's all a very short-term focus. But our job in government is not to act like businesses and to say we're worried about election results or the next quarter. Our job is to supplement what businesses do and to say we are looking at the longer term. And I think right now, the climate crisis is that longer term, and we have to be sure that the solutions we come up with to address these problems that are real are the best ones, considering the economy and the environment. And that's really what I'm advocating for.
Chatting with Darryl Wolk and Leah Tayor, a conservative and a liberal. Darryl is a long-term conservative activist, ran for municipal council in Newmarket. Leah Tayor is the newly elected member of parliament for Remind me again, Newmarket, Oak Ridge is Richmond Hill, correct?
Close. Aurora, Oak Ridge is Richmond Hill.
Aurora, Oak Ridge is Richmond Hill. I apologize. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break and come back. And I'm going to ask them to elevate a little bit and talk about highways versus transit and the population growth in Toronto. And what are we going to do if we don't build highways? Because I understand a lot of the concerns that Leah Tayor has talked about from an environmental standpoint, and some of the advantages that Darryl has talked about. So, how do we, as an economy, how do we, as a community, how would we, as a city area, address these issues? Stay with us, everybody. Fascinating conversation. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a lot of fun tonight talking with Leah Tayor, who is the newly elected member of Parliament for Aurora, Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill, which is a riding north of Toronto. It was Conservative, and she wanted away from the Conservatives to the Liberal Party. And a lot of people think that Leah Tayor is one of these people that we're going to see a lot more of in the future. And given my opportunity to interview her in the past, I've been very impressed by her background and her knowledge of the issues. I tried to give her a firing line of a whole bunch of different policy issues in our last interview, and she answered them all and answered them incredibly well. So I'm looking forward to the future that Leah Tayor has in both the Liberal Party as well as the Parliament of Canada. And Canada generally. And Darryl Wolk, who is a long-term Conservative friend of mine, worked with me eons ago on the Mississauga Summit and Fair Share Appeal. He's worked with a Ontario Municipal Social Services Agency as a government relations public affairs expert. He's done consulting, and he's run for municipal council in Newmarket in the past, and so he knows what he's talking about as well. Maybe I could ask the two of you to elevate just for a second. People have been talking about a population the size of the city of Montreal moving to the Greater Toronto Area in the next 10 years. People have also talked about Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area, doubling in size in the next 30 to 50 years. Joe Barrage, principal of Urban Strategies, one of the top strategic city planning companies, was on my show, and he said that, Brian, we're going to become probably the third largest metropolitan area in North America. We're going to be, after New York and Los Angeles, bigger than Chicago. And the CMA, the way that they describe it in U.S. economic terms, is continuous urban envelope. And he says that's going to go from Oshawa to Niagara Falls. And when you add that all up together, we're going to be the third largest metropolitan area in all of North America. Yet we have one of the most underdeveloped transit and highway systems. And if you compare us to Los Angeles, to New York, to Chicago, to Houston, to any other major metropolitan area in North America, they've got far more roads and far more transit. And I've talked to planners on both sides of this issue about highways. Some that say we've got to build density in downtown Toronto around transit nodes, and all our money should be going into transit all day, two-way electronic GO train service. And others that said, no, you know what? There's a whole bunch of people that still want that dream of a single family home. Caledon's going to go from 50,000 people to 500,000 people. And they can't go all down the 410 or the 427. We're going to need to give them more highways. And if you don't build the 413, you're going to rob people of that dream of a single family home. Because if we actually do double in size, or even just increase in size by the size of Montreal, where are we all going to live? So I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about the growth of Toronto, where people are going to go, and what people like you that are involved in government and public policy have got to do in regards to transit and transportation, highways versus transit. And I remember that at one point in time, someone pointed out, Leah, that we were the only major country in the G7 that did not have a national transportation or transit policy. And so therefore, it's something that we leave too often to municipalities and to provinces. And you think about the Dwight Eisenhower interstate highway system that he sponsored. It was a major thing for the economy. It was a major thing that created the United States. And someone pointed out to me that you think about the 401. If the 401 didn't exist, this one individual that was on my show said, I bet you Quebec separation would have happened. The 401 knits Montreal and Toronto together more than anything else. And if we did not have that 401, and it took 10 hours on Highway 2, I think was the other way that I used to come, it just Canada, Lower Canada, Upper Canada wouldn't be knit together. So assuming that we're going to grow like crazy, what do we do? Leah Tayor, what do you think?
Well, I think that, you're referring to the network of highways and roads that exist in other major metropolitan centers. And I think that we have to look again at where we are today in terms of the climate crisis when we talk about that. We have an opportunity right now as a government. Those roadways you're talking about, we do have the Trans-Canada Highway, and most recently, to my delight, we've got the Trans-Canada Trail, a hiking, walking, biking trail across Canada. Where we have to go, I believe, is where we need transportation for farms and processing, as you've mentioned, Darryl. We need to have dedicated roadways. We don't need 4-lane highways. We're going to develop homes on either side of them, quite frankly. Once we pave, it's done. I always think of the Joni Mitchell song, Pave Paradise, right? Put up a parking lot. It's done. We see you're not going to take out 400, 404, the extension that's there. But we have an opportunity now to say we are looking to the future. And what we need to address our housing crisis, which we have as well as a climate crisis, is not single family homes on large lots anymore. If we're going to have the kind of growth that we're talking about, we're going to start to look a lot more like Europe. We are in transition, and we all talk about transition and change. It's hard. And we all want our kids to have what we had. But the reality is there is a better way. And a lot of the new generation, a lot of the younger generation looks at the future and believes that the climate is more important perhaps than developing all of this green space. Living, infilling, putting in multifamily homes, putting in different kinds of communities where there is increased density around public transit and increasing our public transit. We should be putting in high-speed rail. We should be putting in a hub and spoke system from areas into Toronto with good transit. That's where our money should be going.
Okay, Leah, I agree with you. However, let me point out to you, if I could, that Toronto supposedly has more cranes building buildings, condos in Toronto than any other city in North America. Yet we're building on average, according to someone from the Ontario Real Estate Board that I interviewed just last week, 50,000 homes when demand is for 100,000 homes. So even though we've got more cranes and we're building condos like crazy, we can't meet demand. And yet a lot of people don't even want to live in those condos that are 500 square feet downtown. They want a single family home. So what are you saying is that my kids can't dream for a single family home?
Saying they can't dream for it, Brian. I'm saying a lot of the people I've spoken to aren't dreaming for it. They understand the cost of that, both in terms of the cost of housing right now and land and the environmental cost. And they're happy to be in smaller homes. They're happy to be in areas where there's more densely populated and where they can walk and take public transit. A lot of the young people I speak to today, and seniors for that matter, want smaller homes. And yet we still are on a trajectory with the development industry to go ahead and build large homes on large lots. We are overhoused, quite frankly. We do not need that. And I don't believe that's what most Canadians want. And the way to get the numbers we need is not to build, these $1-2 million houses on that land around that new proposed highway, which is what it'll be to a large extent. What we need is some more densification along areas which are right now underdeveloped in terms of the capacity and in terms of the public transit. But in order for this to work, we need to have more public transit. And the government of Canada is working on that. We just got the extension approved into Richmond Hill on the subway line from Toronto. And we're looking at high-speed rail. We're looking at this kind of a hub and spoke system coming out of Toronto. I believe that's what we need. That's our future. We cannot cling on to the past and deal with both the economic and the environmental challenges that are facing us right now as a country.
Darryl, what do you think? Obviously, Premier Doug Ford thinks this is a wedge issue and probably thinks that a lot of the people that Leah Tayor are talking about are NDP or Liberal supporters, but conservative supporters like the idea about highways and single-family homes in suburbia. What do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think for the first time in years, at least pre-pandemic, and I know I worked closely with you on the Huron-Ontario LRT and Peel region. I know Hamilton's getting an LRT. It's a disaster, but Ottawa has an LRT now. The Ontario line is being built, connecting the Science Centre essentially to the CNE. As Lee mentioned, we now have what's been called for at least 50 years, the extension into Richmond Hill. I'll be honest, I'd love to have the subway extend all the way up to the Upper Canada Mall in Newmarket. The problem is that you've got Oak Ridges, you've got Stouffville, you got King. There's a lot of land in between the densely populated area of York Region in Markham, Vaughan, and Richmond Hill. Then you have environmentally sensitive Oak Ridges marine land that would be expensive to, for example, build or extend the subway. And then you have a newly emerging urban area of Newmarket and Aurora. Now, York Region, to be honest with you, if you look at compared to Halton, Peel, and Durham, frankly, we've invested in public transit, including with municipal dollars. There was a project on Davis Drive in Newmarket. I can tell you it's a bit of a white elephant, $100 million for 3 bus stops. Currently, it's empty, but a lot of the arguments that were being used to build that in the first place was to have intensification all along Davis Drive. And unfortunately, the developers have only built a couple of condos so far in that process. We also have GO trains that are vital. As I said, there's movement now on the new Vaughan, Bolton, Caledon GO train line. We've been fighting in Newmarket, Aurora for a 15-minute GO service, and that's certainly come through, at least to Aurora, and eventually to Barrie. And the Richmond Hill GO train line has been extended out to Richmond Hill at Bloomington Station, and potentially could go out further as far as Beaverton. So there's definitely public transit investment. And public transit's important. I think one challenge that we're going to see now post-pandemic is work from home has become a lot more popular, and our entire GO system is basically geared towards people coming out of the suburbs and into the downtown core. I don't think we're ever going back to Toronto in the same way that we were before. There's going to be a lot more work from home. And in terms of highways, just because you build a highway, I don't necessarily think emissions are going to go up. The growth is coming, whether we like it or not. At the end of the day, if you don't build this highway, all those cars are still going to be sitting idle on Green Lane to get from east to west in the northern part of the region. The 400, the 404, the 427, the 410, they're all going to be parking lots. So we're dealing with growth. We have to keep up with infrastructure. The other thing I'll point out is a big part of the fall economic statement for Doug Ford was the investment in our automotive sector towards electric vehicles. We have some strategic advantages with the Ring of Fire to revitalize areas like Sudbury, where mining for nickel, for example, could be huge in the development of electric cars. So I'm fully on side. I hope by 2030 we have some regulations. We have the technology to build cars with long-lasting batteries and that uphold in the wintertime, and that could reduce emissions. But there has to be balance. And as I said, if people aren't traveling to Toronto, there's great public transit that gets us into the city, but there's not a lot that connects our communities, say from Newmarket to Mississauga or to different communities around Toronto. So we're still going to need the car. And like you mentioned, climate change is important. There has to be technological solutions, but we also have to be realistic. We're an oil producing nation where it's cold in the wintertime, where we're going to have to use natural gas. We see the energy crisis Europe's going through, and the fact that Europe, China, India, places like that are all increasing their emissions, having to rely on coal again. And we have to propose solutions that people are actually going to utilize. Nobody wants to turn off their heat and wear a sweater. We can't bike to Toronto. So ultimately, there's going to have to be balance, and there's going to have to be technological innovation with the private sector combined with strategic regulations to push forward these technologies.
So Leah, one of the issues that Darryl talked about, I want to ask you about. I had the Vice President of Corporate Affairs for General Motors on my show, and he said that by 2030, GM was going to be 100% electrical vehicles. So if, that trend happens, such that transportation by auto is no longer damaging to the climate, are you still against building highways?
Well, it's still, the electric vehicles are a necessary part of our reaching our emissions reduction targets, to be sure. But highways are damaging to the environment. So we have to build more highways. I think our push, and Darryl, you described it very well, all of the initiatives that are happening on public transit. I think that's where we have to go. And with, a different approach to housing, I think more people will be taking it, public transit as well. There will still always be a need for some vehicles, always. I'm not disputing that. But I think we want to manage that and keep that number low. And I would just say one thing about it, which is the public transit is always going to be better than electric vehicles, obviously better than combustion engines, for sure. But public transit is the top one. So we want to try and keep the number of cars on the roads about where it is and transition them to electric. Put more people in public transit, build our public transit networks. That's really the future, I think. And we have a fascinating opportunity as one of those areas which is growing in North America and could well become the third largest. Although I'm not sure Mexico City fits in there, but we will, obviously, we're at a point where we are now looking at how to deal with this growth. And we have options. We can't look to the past. We can't rely on a 40-year-old environmental study. And we have to say, how do we move forward? So this proposed small highway, the Bradford bypass, right, going to cost about $1.5 billion is the newest estimates on that. You know how much public transit we could put in for that? It's 16 kilometers. It's taking out wetlands. And you know what the economic cost of taking out those wetlands will be for the homeowners in that area? The Intact Center at the University of Waterloo has estimated that flood costs, which have not just economic costs for individuals, but also for our insurance agency, for our whole economic sector, and a psychological cost to people, those costs, just the dollar costs, will increase 30 to 40% if we continue to pave and not preserve natural infrastructure. So these areas that we're proposing to pave over are not neutral. And it's not just about the birds or the grass or the wetlands. This is about how we manage and mitigate the environmental impacts that we already are dealing with that are only going to increase with climate change. So we have to really have a broader look when we're talking about this. And I would say, you know, you mentioned that the cars that are already on these roads, putting in this Bradford bypass. If someone said to me today, look, you know, Premier Ford is so committed to the environment that he has said that none of the area around the Bradford bypass, that land on either side, is not going to be developed for new housing. I'd say, okay, maybe we're going to put an urban park in there. But that's not what's going to happen. And we all know it. The only change that's been made to the Bradford bypass is to go around a golf course that is owned by a friend. And we know the land on either side is slated for development. That's why people want this right now, quite frankly, in addition to taking time off for both cottagers and you know, our agriculture industry. And when we do that, we create more traffic. So now we're creating more cars on the 404 South, on the 400 North. We're increasing that, and our goal should not be to increase the number of cars. I agree with you 100%. We want to switch the existing fleets to electric vehicles, and then we want to electrify our public transit and build it. We don't want to add more cars and more pavement right now,
Okay,
unless
so
it's absolutely necessary.
so Leah, I understand what you're saying. Let me ask you about the politics of it then for a second. And maybe Darryl, then you can pipe in as well, because you know no one was talking about this, and then Ford talked about it in his economic update, and all of a sudden became a big issue. So he obviously thinks it's a wedge issue. And Leah, you and I talked about the 905, and it's important in the federal election back a couple months ago, and you were one of the only people that was able to turn a conservative riding liberal, and a lot of the best balance of the 905 was liberal stayed liberal, and the conservatives federally weren't able to crack the 905 to much degree, other than one or two spots, and because of that, the liberals formed government. In the last provincial election, Doug Ford won every seat in Mississauga, and I think he won every seat but one in Brampton. I can't be sure of that. And so therefore, Doug Ford and the Conservatives did a clean sweep almost of suburbia. So the fight in the next election in June is going to be provincially, is going to be suburbia. Why do you think Doug Ford sees this as a winning wedge issue for Conservatives in suburbia?
I don't know, Brian, but I think some of the wedge issues the Conservatives have chosen to focus on, both in the past federal election and in this provincial election, are just on the wrong side of progress. You know, we can look at what happened in the federal election, and I think part of it was the environment. You know, their plan was not robust at all. And you can see how the Liberals with the environmental plan, and I would say it's part of the reason I was able to take that riding. Our team was very much committed to the environment, and people, it was an issue for people, not just like I say, a birds and a flora and fauna issue, an issue of flooding in their backyards. an issue of what's happening on our coasts across our country. There are many, many people, conservatives included. And I think when you're looking at the polls right now and where what Ford is looking at, I think he's on the wrong side of some of these issues. You can look at everything from vaccines to the environment to gun control. And I believe that the Conservatives are out of step with what most Canadians want right now. And for sure, most young people want right now.
Darryl, is Premier Doug Ford on the wrong side of progress? What a great statement.
Yeah, no, I would disagree with a lot of those points. I think the first one on the cost, $1.2 billion, let's be real here. The federal government has doubled the national debt in a single year. All that money, some of it went to emergency supports. A third of it had nothing to do with the pandemic. We're in a financial crisis, especially with interest rates going up next week. $1.2 billion is a drop in the bucket compared to what we've been spending on a wide range of issues. In the case of the politics around the Bradford bypass, I'll be totally honest with you. The York-Simcoe riding is the same as Duffer and Caledon. Caroline Maroney can go on a vacation for the next 3 months and she'll win it handily. It's not going to make much of a difference as a big issue in ridings like Newmarket Aurora or Aurora Oak Ridges either way, where the actual swing ridings are. As far as top issues go, I think the reason Justin Trudeau won was his handling of the pandemic and the fact that we saw surging cases during the election campaign. There was also a big campaign against the unvaccinated. I think Ford's going to face a similar issue, and that's why the pandemic, according to an Abacus poll, is the top issue. The next big issue is cost of living and inflation. I think that's going to dominate this year. And ultimately, healthcare. As I mentioned, we doubled the national debt. We haven't increased the provincial transfers to our hospitals. We've got a capacity crisis. With 600 people in the ICU, we're overstretched, yet our population has 15 million. There's absolutely no excuse for that. I know the people at South Lake are struggling to keep up, and it's also preventing us from reopening. And public transit, absolutely, I support it 100%. But we're also in the middle of a pandemic. Those GO trains are empty right now. And at least right now, I don't see a scenario where people are packed standing room only, crowding in the Union Station until we come up with a vaccine that actually stops the spread of transmission.
What a fascinating conversation we're having tonight with Leah Tayor, the MP for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, and Darryl Wolk, a long-term Conservative activist and former candidate for municipal government in Newmarket. We're going to take a break, a final break, and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a really interesting conversation about the Bradford bypass, about Highway 413, about city building, about transit, about transportation, about size of government deficit, about priorities, about the provincial election, etc. with Leah Tayor. She is the newly elected member of parliament for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, north of Toronto, and Darryl Wolk, who is a Ontario Municipal Social Services Organization government affairs person and a former candidate municipally in Newmarket. Leah, one of the other issues that people have talked about is this $10 a day childcare, and that people, number one, were surprised that Ford was so against it, but then recently he's been making noises that he's for it. Do you think that we're actually going to see Premier Ford buy into a national daycare program put forward by the Liberals?
I certainly hope so. And I know many people, my constituents and across the province, are hoping so too. I think this is one really concrete way that we can invest in the economy and address the cost of living and the financial problems or issues that people are facing right now, given where we're at with a lot of issues. This program is a good example of social infrastructure. It's a good example of a program where we're looking broadly at not just the needs of a group of people, primarily women, who were 12 times more likely than men to have to leave the workforce during the pandemic, but also at our broader economy. We in Canada are really lucky because we have a very relevant example in Quebec. We know what increased workforce participation and reduced absenteeism that comes out of increased productivity that comes out of a program like this. And there have been estimates done by different independent groups, our banks, our consulting companies, that have shown that for every dollar we invest in this program, our economy is going to get $2 to $3 back. So this is that kind of program that I'm kind of talking about with the Bradford Bypass, where we have to step back, look at the longer term, look at all the implications of a program and say, does it make sense? And this one does. And if Doug Ford is the only premier, and we are the only province that does not take advantage of this national program that was introduced 50 years ago, Darryl. The Bradford Bypass may have been 40, but this is 50 years ago that this was first, we tried to put this in, and we almost got it through before the Conservatives took over from the Liberals, and it was canceled by Harvard. But we have an opportunity now. And I believe that, again, Doug Ford will be on the wrong side of this issue if he doesn't sign up for this. And of course, the Liberals will, when they win, put this in any event. So I'm sure we're going to get it.
Darryl, what do you think? Daycare, national program?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Lee's saying. I mean, it's crucial for economic development to increase labor participation and to address the cost of living. I think a deal is close between the federal and provincial government. And of course, in Ontario, it's municipalities that are system service managers for the childcare system. We want to increase capacity. We want to increase the pay of ECEs that are dramatically underpaid. We want to protect quality. And we want to make sure that there's enough money to actually deliver on cutting fees in half within a year and $10 a day. So, I mean, negotiations are ongoing between Minister Lecce and Minister Gould, and I think there's an incentive for everybody to work out a deal. And I think for everybody's sake, let's hope that comes soon.
Boy, Conservatives and Liberals can actually work together. Sounds good. Leah,
Love it.
you got a big speech coming up this week. Tell us about it.
Yes, this week I'm the keynote speaker at the York University McLaughlin College, which is their school of public policy. They have every year a celebration, and it's a great time for it. And I'll be talking about lessons for students and for people. It's called Playbook for Success, Lessons from the Political Journey. And I'm going to be focusing on the last two campaigns, but with just some, examples from the campaign and some advice for young people about how to move forward and how to define and achieve success for themselves.
If people want to listen to that, how do they watch it? Is it on going to be online?
Yes, it's going to be online. In fact, because of course, the pandemic, so it's open to anyone to register, but you do need to register. If you just Google McLaughlin College first year celebration, it's this Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m.
Leah Tayor, MP for Aurora, Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill. Thank you so much for joining us. And Darryl Wolk, just a really nice guy. Really appreciate it, both of you. I don't know what I think now about the Bradford Bypass, because both of you have made really great arguments on both sides of the issue. And I don't know what I think about the Highway 413. I do think that we've got to build a lot more transit-oriented development. I agree with a lot of the things that Leah Tayor talked about in regards to building cities more like Europe, where we've got higher density. The missing middle is something that I've focused on this show quite a bit. But I got to tell you, at the same time, particularly if we're thinking of a future with electronic vehicles, if not autonomous vehicles, such that some of the complaints about highways are lessened. And I think about us doubling in size, actually doubling in size in the next 20 to 30 years. I wonder if we're going to need more highways. And, I think Leah's comment about building the 400 through the Holland Marsh may not have been approved today, but then I bet you the Don Valley Parkway wouldn't have been approved either. And I can't imagine Toronto without the Don Valley Parkway. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting discussion that we're going to have about this Highway 413, about the Bradford Bypass, about building transit. And the one thing, in addition to everything else that I liked that we talked about, was high-speed rail. And so I'm going to have you back, Leah, sometime in the future to talk about high-speed rail. There's 24 trains a day between Boston and Washington. There's 4 between Toronto and Montreal. That's an issue. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. Leah Tayor, MP, Darryl Wolk, nice guy. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Darryl.